of this grief and anguish and anger and truth-telling is the same Jeremiah who will go out and buy a piece of land. Now, isn't that ridiculous? I said that the role of the priest is ceremonial. The role of the prophet is ritual. And ritual differs from ceremony because where ceremony maintains and blesses the status quo, ritual challenges and questions and pulls the rug out from the status quo, or status quo, whichever you like. They're both good. It used to be a rock band to me. In fact, one of my jokes, I remember one of the two, sorry, this is a little aside. I remember one of the two Ronnie's jokes from my 1970s upbringing in Britain. And said, important news flash. Status Quo have just cancelled their tour of Europe. Apparently the guy who plays E is ill. Sorry, that was just an aside. Anyway, status quo, whichever you choose as your language. People divided, across this continent by one common language, or whatever Churchill said. The fact remains that the challenging of that through ritual is tremendously powerful. And Jeremiah, having announced the end of his civilization, so to speak, the wholesale slavery of his people and the complete failure of the political leadership of his day, says it's all over, we're gone, we're being led off into slavery. And there are economic slaveries that happen in today's world without ever having to leave home, incidentally. Goes out and buys a piece of land from this land that's about to be taken from all of them. What a ridiculous act. What a waste. I mean, you've only got this much money left, and you go out and purchase something that's going to be taken away from you. Why would you do that? Well, of course, for one simple reason. Jeremiah, like all the prophets, will use something visible, tangible, and clear to all the world to spell out another message. So that 20 years later, sitting in their slavery, hanging up their harps and mourning by the waters of Babylon, the people will remember that there was a man who was stupid and crazy enough to do the entirely counterintuitive thing and say, one day, you're coming back. One day, we will all be here again. It may be your children, it may be your children's children, it may be your children's children's children. But let me give you the voice of hope and the voice of promise. And the role of the prophet is not only to critique and not only to challenge the status quo, but also to engage in those actions and activities that will raise up our spirits for the future, to trust that when everything seems bleak, impossible, and black as death itself, that is not the last word, and never the last word. Jesus comes to us as the fulfillment of all three of these prophetic, priestly, and kingly offices. He comes to us as the good shepherd, the one who gathers and unites. I have within me, as I've been on sabbatical and as I've watched the world around me, see isolation, agendas of wall building and enforcing separation, agendas of race baiting and deliberate fear mongering. I have felt committed ever more deeply to the work of spiritual growth and transformation, for this world and for ourselves. The word spirituality without borders just keep coming back at me. For every border that humans seek to enforce, every artificial division and scattering of humanity, I see an impulse to transcend and unify and gather that I see in Jesus in all his weakness and vulnerability. I see that agenda, and I seek to lead us on a pathway of transformation that will bring us into that borderless unity. You'll have a little package at the end of today's service, and it'll have a little program that says Spirituality Without Borders. It'll have a list of things that we're going to plan to do in 2017. I had the privilege of sitting down with Bishop Remy Dereau, and he and I are planning to collaborate together in offering programs here at the Bethlehem Center in Nanaimo and with the Center for Action and Contemplation in New Mexico, and to host those and celebrate them, and to bring in front of people not only the voice of lament for all that is broken and hurting in our world, but to bring the voice of hope for change and transformation, and to be that change itself as we gather and talk and share and engage in those practices of simplicity and those rug-pulling rituals that will enable us to embrace a new vision of the world, where the house that lies desolate on the piece of land that we bought and was taken from us will still be available to us and our grandchildren in the future as a place of hope. And we call that the Paschal Mystery. We call that the dying and the rising again of Jesus. You know, people wanted many signs from Jesus, who was the new Jeremiah in many ways, as well as the new David and the new Moses and all of these things. And he said, you know, they said basically, go ahead and impress us. Give us something. And he said, there's no sign for this generation except for the sign of Jonah. That's all I've got to give you as a sign. A prophet who ran away, jumped on a boat, got thrown off, swallowed up by a fish, and went down into the deep, dark waters and the belly of the whale. And he said, that'll be me, and that'll be you. And there is no other way. And there is no other sign. The only way to be spat out upon the other shore is to go down, to go away, to go into vulnerability, helplessness, weakness, death, and lostness, because that is the only pathway. And when you get there, the only way out, it's never the way of blame and whose fault it is and which party platform was wrong and which leaders, blah, 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 are whoever it was that we want to blame. Jesus said, and we heard him say it this morning in our gospel, he just looks out upon every eon and century of failed political leadership, as well as on the immediate people who capture, torture him, notice torture, and condemn him to a profoundly painful death, and simply breathes forgiveness over the whole experience, over the ignorance that underlies it. It's simply a not knowing. If we knew the love that drives the world, we could not torture people. And so Jesus, rather than blaming those who torture and those who set it up, simply says, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. And in that moment, he becomes not only priest, offering his life at the altar of the cross, and not only prophet, speaking truth into the torturers and the sufferers of the world, but he becomes the king, enthroned with that crown of thorns that makes him bleed, but speaks the truth of the world as it mingles his blood and his tears. For this is our hope, that there is one who has shown us the way. And in him the whole game holds together. In Christ, suffering, dying, and spat out upon the shore of new life, lies our hope for every future. Lies our piece of land on which we will build after exile. Lies the beginning of a new life beyond borders, and a good shepherding that includes and unifies everything and everyone, and draws them into the place and circle of love and compassion.